Yeah, I didn't agree to that. Good evening, everyone. My name is Greg. I'm alcoholic. Thanks to God's sponsorship and actions I've taken in Alcoholics Anonymous, my sobriety date is January 4th, 1995. And for that, I'm truly grateful. There's a lot of people to thank for me just being so well taken care of while I've been visiting Salt Lake City. I missed my opportunity to introduce myself as being from out of town as soon as I discovered that there was someone new in Alcoholics Anonymous here. And I don't even know if he's still here tonight. Zach, are you still here? There you are. As soon as I learned that Zach was here, I started thinking about Zach. And so I missed my opportunity to say I'm from out of town. And I can tell you that it wasn't always like that. When I heard that someone might need help, my first thought wasn't, well, how can I help them? My first thought was usually, I don't know. I probably didn't think about it at all, actually, to be honest with you. So I want to thank my host, Jose, for being such a good friend, his sponsor, Pat, for keeping him reasonably sane and healthy. And Jose clearly has a lot of really good, deep friendships here, and I've been benefiting from that without having to do any of the heavy lifting. So to all of those who've been friendly to me, I really appreciate that. It makes me feel really comfortable here. Thank you, Ben, for asking me to. Where did Ben go? Oh, there you are. Thanks for asking me to speak. Not until today, so it's only wrecked my day because I thought all day about what I would say to you. Thank God you didn't ask me a month ago. So that's a real blessing. And I thought that I should probably start with not the drinking, which I love hearing stories about, but just real briefly cover everything that was vital to me getting sober, and then I'll go back and do a little drinking and get sober, and then however much of that I can fit back in, that's great. But there might be someone here that's I don't know, that's new or considering AA, or can't sort out for themselves like how do you get sober? What does that look like for somebody? The most important thing was I got a sponsor, and I got a sponsor at the end of my first AA meeting, and it was granted it was easier for me to ask him to sponsor me because I knew him. Although it was simultaneously more difficult because I did not like him. I didn't ask him until I was sober 5 years if he even knew that I didn't like him. Just a shock on his face was something to see, but he knew that was probably my untreated alcoholism. In fact, it was. So despite the fact that I was afraid to ask him and I was afraid he'd say no, he said yes, and immediately listed some things for me to do, and I'm like, wait a minute, what's happening right now? I didn't know what a sponsor meant. The only time I ever heard the term used was like getting sponsors for race car drivers. So I had a sponsor right away, and I had a big book, which he had given me years before during my one AA meeting, and he suggested I read that, so I read it on my third day of sobriety. The book made no sense to me at all. He made sure I had a copy of the 12 and 12 because we worked the steps out of the big book in the 12 and 12. But the most meaningful book he gave me was Living Sober. And the reason that was so helpful is because AA spiritual language made no sense to me at all. And so after meetings, I found myself wanting to talk to someone or really argue with them about something they had said during the meeting, because that makes no sense, right? That doesn't, like, let go and let God. What's that going to do? Right, seriously? So I liked Living Sober because it had really simple directions that seemed like astonishingly brilliant to me. Like, if you still have booze in your house, you might want to pour it out. I say that kind of facetiously, but kind of not, because my habits as an alcoholic while trying to get sober are going to get me drunk again. But I don't know that. So Living Sober basically is things I'm going to run into in day-to-day life and kind of how to handle them. And it just, it until the steps started to make sense because I was doing them, not because I was studying them. Living sober was huge, so I had those three pieces of the literature. So how did I end up in AA? Let me think, I got sober in 95, and I met Les and Sherry in 1990, 89, second 89, yeah, 1989. I was watching cartoons on a Saturday morning, see this car driving slowly by a vacant lot that has a foundation in it, and the construction stopped. Car stops, I'm like, I'm in the real estate business at that time. I'm like, that might be a potential customer. So I go running out to the car in my bare feet with my business card to introduce myself. And there's a stack of 35 business cards between Les and Sherry on their seat. And I hand her my card and introduce myself and say, basically, let me help you find a house. And Sherry says, we're working with everybody and anybody. Anybody can find us a house first, that's the one that's going to get it. Had I not pursued them, like my life depended upon it, I don't know who I would have called, because those are the only people I ever met in Alcoholics Anonymous in my travels. And so then the morning after the last night I drank, I had someone to call. Otherwise, I would have never even been introduced to AA. I would have had no idea this was going on. And there's no telling where I would be right now. So, so thank God, over those 35 realtors, I captured them, and I may have had my first drink when I was 4 or 5 years old, and that wouldn't become so meaningful until I get sober and I'm fighting with, am I really alcoholic or not? And when the book says that no person likes to admit that they're bodily or mentally different from their fellows, that really speaks true to me. My opinion of alcoholics and alcoholism is not great, and so I don't want to put myself in that class for sure. But the fact that I think I remember having a drink when I was four years old, actually, is really meaningful to me when I'm in my first step in my first 30 or 60 days of AA, trying to figure out if I'm alcoholic or not. And I tracked down my half-sister, who I had not spoken to my entire adult life, found out that both of two of my grandparents had died of alcoholism. That was helpful. And the other thing that helped me to understand that I was alcoholic was less my drinking history and my drinking career than your shares. So I went to a lot of AA meetings, and I like my first few months of sobriety, while I was even working on my second, third, and fourth step, was focusing on, am I really alcoholic? Do I truly believe in my innermost self that I'm powerless over alcohol? And that's not something that I came to decide overnight. I didn't say I was alcoholic at my first AA meeting. I said it at my second meeting and was immediately confronted after the meeting about why I thought I was alcoholic. And so I gave a little bit of an explanation, and the person that was questioning me said, that doesn't mean you're alcoholic. And so I described a little more of my drinking, which was just a heavy, another heavy drinking story. He goes, that doesn't mean you're alcoholic either. And then his girlfriend saw him picking on me and made him leave me alone. But that was a profound moment, because what it really taught me is I didn't know what it meant to be alcoholic. And so it had me look and think about, what does it really mean to be alcoholic? It turns out there's a definition in our literature. If you haven't found it, I suggest to get a sponsor, sit down and find it. And find whether you're alcoholic or not yourself. It's the only step I got to get right. It really is. The rest of them are just a lifelong practice. But I have to keep the plug in the jug, which is a horrible way of telling people to stay sober. So I I had a lot of indications that I had a drinking problem, but I wasn't paying attention. So when I was about 23 years old, I was rock climbing up at Devil's Lake State Park, like I used to every weekend. And what was different about this time is that one of my climbing buddies had a half-gallon of wine in the back of his van, and I decided it'd be a good idea to drink that on the way up on a Saturday morning, which was probably questioned by some of my climbing buddies, but not too much, And I ended up trying to lead climb something that was the poorest choice in the world, and I fell. The one piece of protection I had came out while I fell, and I fell 35 feet and broke my jaw, but nothing else. And that was an opportunity for me to take a look at what's going on here. We had a rule: you don't climb under the influence, and I quickly and easily discarded that rule and spent no time in self-examination as to maybe something's going on here. Strangely, while my jaw is wired shut, I have another clue that maybe I have a drinking problem because I absolutely stopped drinking entirely. I'm afraid that if I drink too much, that I'll throw up and asphyxiate and not be able to get these rubber bands that have my jaw wired shut off me fast enough, and I'll drown in my own vomit. And yet it never occurs to me that maybe I have a drinking problem if I can't control my drinking, and I don't know whether I'll drink so much that I'll get sick. I ended up not being able to stay sober the entire time. All those things actually happen. I drink too much, I get sick, but I carry a pair of scissors around with me for 6 months. I cut the rubber bands, I throw up, I'm fine. A couple years after that, I was jobless and pretty close to homeless, living in Lansing, Michigan, the Ethiopia of the United States. The unemployment rate's 20.5%. There's no work. Somehow I find this wanted ad where they're looking for a custodian at a church, and I'm interviewing for the job as a custodian while having dropped out of graduate school. Never mind the disconnect between almost having a master's and I'm going to be a janitor. That's a little damaging my pride, but we're going to get over that. So during the interview, the manager says, well, we have this security guard job too, but we didn't want to combine those jobs like we had it before because it made the last person an alcoholic. And I got it like this knot in my stomach that I did not remember again. I didn't pay any attention to it at the time, and I didn't remember it again until I'm in AA. And so as I'm starting to get sober and starting to look at am I really powerless over alcohol, I start to see and remember these things. And this takes weeks of time. So if you're new in AA and you're not sure you're alcoholic, I get it. Or you're not completely convinced, I get it. I think there's a reason that our book is, the first 164 pages is a solution, but the rest of it is all stories to help you identify if you're one of us, if you have this problem. And I think that's really kind of prophetic. I have one more tell, and there's lots of them. I mean, I could probably tell drinking stories for an hour if I thought that was useful. But I remember getting up one morning. I had been drinking the night before, and I had too much to drink. I was home and I'd had too much to drink, and the room was spinning. So I get the great idea. I think I'll go drive around for a little bit and sober up. God. So I wake up the next morning and I remember that I can't remember everything. So I I almost like sneak out of bed. I'm on the second floor of my duplex. Nobody can see me, but I almost sneak out of bed like somebody's watching, and I kind of like sheepishly sneak over to the window like somebody's thinking or watching me, because I always thought the whole world was paying attention to me. And I peek outside to see if my car is out there and if I can see any damage. And I can't, and so then I'm like, well, I got to go look at the front. I literally am not sure if there's human flesh on the front of my car or not. And I have to convince myself that when I go out there and look at my car, my neighbors won't know what I'm doing. And so I do, and I go and I look at the front of the car. Like there's no blood or anything. Thank God, nothing happened. And then I just proceed to drink like I always have for another, I don't know how many years. So the last night I drank, I was not completely drunk. And it almost cost my girlfriend her life. I think if I was more drunk, I would have felt less, meaning less anger and less resentment. So I almost killed her. I'm not going to get the details of that. It's violent and it's pretty ugly. We have a child in the room too. Needless to say, I got up the next day and I was able to say to myself, honestly, for the first time in my life, there's something wrong with me. And I have no idea what it is, but there's something wrong with me. I had never been violent towards another human being in my entire life. I dusted up with guys once in a while. I'd been in a few fist fights when I was in high school, but that's different. I mean, it really is. It's just, when kids can't work stuff out. Nothing like this. And so, and that's the crack. That's the crack in my ego. And the first humble thought I've ever had, maybe ever, I don't know. And so I call Sherry, my to-be sponsor's ex-wife, and she says, call Les. And so I call Les, I tell him what happened. I said, what do I do? And he says, well, I'm going to a meeting tomorrow night. Do you want to go? And I said, yes. And I said, what should I do between now and then? It's Wednesday morning. He says, well, try not drinking. And I had told him when I called him that I was never going to drink again. I'm never going to drink again. I was taking the one cop-out that I always thought was a cop-out, which I was going to blame my drinking for who I was and what I'd done. And so he says, try not drinking, and I get slightly offended. And I really don't know what I'm up against. So Les brings me to my second AA meeting. The first one was several years before that, and it was the only time Les and I've ever walked out of a meeting where he said that wasn't a very good meeting. And I didn't know what he meant at the time. I didn't think anything about it. I learned after being in Alcoholics Anonymous a while. In fact, it was not a very good meeting. There was no message of recovery at all. So I better get to one, huh? So I go to this meeting, and it's a group. It's an AA group. And they ask, it's a topic meeting. They ask if it's anybody's first meeting. And so Les encourages me to raise my hand, so I raise my hand. And so they all have a first step meeting for me, and they all talk at me, and they tell me what I need to do to get sober. Now, mind you, I'm not even sure I'm alcoholic, right? So by the time it gets halfway around the room, I'm getting pretty mad, and I just want to leap across the table and choke somebody, which is a terrible analogy since that's what I had done 2 nights ago. But despite not liking the delivery so much, I swear every person in that meeting said, get a sponsor. And so I did. And I've been sober since then. Or at least dry. So the other thing was great about that group. It was a young people's group. There was a ton of enthusiasm. They were all about the traditions. And and being a group and serving Alcoholics Anonymous and serving the newcomer. And they use their funds to give, like anybody that's new to AA, they gave you a big book. They didn't care. You got to have the solution. If you leave with it tonight and don't pick it up for, in my case, 4 years, you'll have it when it's time to read it. So we used to give out big books to every newcomer. And we had greeters, and we had a GSR, and we were in the directory, and it was a rabid bunch of teenagers that were sober. One of the people that used to get my face all the time was this 17-year-old with 20 months of sobriety, Sarah Beth. You know, she'd hear me sharing a meeting, and she'd come up to me afterward, and she'd like, well, "What was that? You know, what step are you on? You need to talk to your sponsor." That's the AA that I grew up with. I don't do that so much in my home group now. It's really not well received. You guys are so sensitive nowadays. But I would drive 20 minutes home, and for 15 minutes I'd be mad at her, and then I'd realize, oh my God, she's right. You know, she would tell me, she would give me a solution, and in that 20, 25 minutes of pause and reflection, I would just like, and what would amaze me is this 17-year-old kid knew more about living life than I did. And that did more for me believing that there's something really profound here, than just about anything else I experienced. This kid that doesn't know anything about, has no life experience, meaning they've had less opportunity to wreck less stuff, has more wisdom than I've ever known. So I got sober in a young people's group who believe in sponsorship and service. They were involved in the Wisconsin Conference of Young People in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we throw a statewide conference once a year. And I served that organization off and on my first 20 years of sobriety. In the meantime, served wherever I was asked at the district level. I did a stint for area for a bit, and I just did what everybody did. We served Alcoholics Anonymous. We sought out the new person. I got every new person's phone number in my thing. I still have that. I still have a couple of them. It's back when you had to write it down. There were no cell phones. And we worked the steps, and we did group inventories. And that was it. It was a Unity Recovery Service, right? What's on the coin. What's missing from the coin now is HOW, honesty, open-minded, and willingness. I don't know why they pulled that off the coins. They should put it back on there. It kept reminding me how close-minded I was to, well, I'm not going to try that. That won't work. You know, that's a death sentence in AA. I'm not going to try that. That won't work. So I owe Alcoholics Anonymous and my home group and my sponsor my life, and everything that I have accomplished and everything that I can identify as good is a direct result of me keeping coming here and getting picked on by people like Pat, who cracked on me before the meeting tonight because my thinking's a little screwed up, and he's like, no. And I appreciate that. That's the AA I grew up on, and he was absolutely right. I'm like, where did I come up with this idea that my home group has to have we should rotate out a female GSR. The GSR is whoever's sick enough that wants to have the job. Happen to be all the guys in my home group are like, no, I need it. So, that's the AA that I grew up on, and I've had to dial it back a little bit because the AA seems to be much less in your face and confrontational, or like just going up and questioning people. I don't think we do that like I used to, or maybe I was just in the one small group where maybe I was just the one like this guy. Someone's got to talk to him. I don't know, but it's exactly what I needed. So I was really sponsored, not just by my sponsor, but the whole group watched me. They corrected me. I remember the basket's going around 7th tradition. I see lots of smokers not putting any money in. I say something and I get creamed. It's like A's for fun or for free, shut up. People give what they want when they want. It's none of your business. Half the room yelled at me at once. So what's my life like now? I've heard a couple stories tonight about how impossibly amazing things can happen for you in recovery, and it sounds like a cliche, but cliches can also be true. I have an extraordinary life that I could not imagine because it was beyond my imagination and beyond my experience when I was a practicing alcoholic. I did not know how to be a good friend, and I did not know what it was like to have a really good friend. I did not know what it was like to experience honesty with other people, a lot of people, and be absolutely transparent about who I am, both the good stuff and the not so great stuff. What's wrong with me? I got plenty. I'm human. My home group is as extraordinary. Those people have been carrying me for 3-4 years in AA. I have not had an easy time of staying committed to being in AA. And yet, even as it's impossible for you to imagine leaving, I don't have another plan. My attendance is never as good as I feel it should be. And there's by anybody's standards, it's not as good as it should be. My home group doesn't seem to matter. They don't seem to care. They just love me. And every time I go there, I'm like, oh my God, why don't I do this? Why don't I do more of this? So I'm going to touch briefly on the steps. It's such a personal experience that my experience of them should be very different in some fundamental ways than anybody else's, because when I go through spiritual literature, it's just different for everybody. We're spiritual beings, and you can take while risking being controversial, if you take the Christian Bible and look at all the different ways that that's practiced, you can see it turns out differently for people. And AA's literature is very much like that. So my first step was too short and not thorough enough. I just said to my sponsor, yeah, I get it, I'm alcoholic, let's move on. A lot of people don't do that. They get into literature, they go into the definitions, all that. My sponsor was a master at that third step of letting go. I heard a couple of really good third steps tonight. That guy, if he didn't, he could not have survived me. So I immediately was confronted with the second step, and I thought you guys were all just lying to me, and I had to believe in a Christian God. That's just what I thought. And I did my very best with that, even as I'm being told by everybody in the room, that's not what this is. That's not what this is. And it wasn't until about 16 or 18 years of sobriety that I really started pursuing Buddhist practices with a vengeance. I'm not Buddhist. I practice the religion of AA, really. I practice these steps and these traditions and the concepts to the best of my ability. And I have you guys to point it out when I'm missing the mark. So I trust in the group a lot. The third step, which I heard a couple fantastic leads on tonight, is turning my will and my life over is, to me, one of the hardest things to do. To let go of control, to just step back, like do just my piece and then not try and force it. It's so hard to not force it. Not to just one more thing. I say one more thing. Just do one more thing. And then maybe it'll work out for me. Like I know what I need, which is the great illusion. I think I know what I need. Steps 4 through 7, are house cleaning, and I did not put. 4th step is fears list, harms done to others, and character defects. And I left off the one thing I swore I would never told another human being until I walked into my sponsor's house to do the 5th step with him, and he told me what was on his 4th step that's written down nowhere, and I immediately knew that's it, I'm giving it up. I spent my 6 years of sobriety relooking at the 6th and 7th steps because there's so much to be mined there. It was worth a year of concerted concentration and effort. So I used to go to 4 o'clock almost every day after work, and I'd pull out that 6th step and the 12 and 12 and read it again. My 9th step amends were not done with my sponsor's guidance. I didn't even know that was a thing. I got to them too quickly. I can't say if I did more harm than good. I can say I haven't drunk again, and I can say I haven't redone them. I haven't gone and tried and fixed what I did. I did what I did. I did the best I could. I have sat down with men I've sponsored, and in fact, I worked with one guy on an amend for, I think, 9 months before he could give it. It was that dangerous. Continue to take personal inventory of the 10th step. It's not hard to spot when something's going on where I'm wrong usually, although sometimes I'm just oblivious to how destructive what I say can be. Usually I'm re-explaining things to myself a lot, rethinking things a lot. I'm avoiding something a lot. There's tells, and I've gotten used to them over time. And when a tell comes up, the next thing I do is I tell on myself. And it can be it can be the cashier at PDQ. It doesn't matter to me. But I haven't been the guy that always goes to my sponsor and tells on myself. Frequently, it's been the first human being that's standing in front of me. I might tell a cashier at PDQ, I just judge that person like, what was I thinking? I know nothing about them. And invariably they laugh and they go, oh yeah, I do that too, the bigger stuff, of course, I bring that to the view of the people who I'm most afraid to tell. And then the prayer and meditation, I remember a good friend of mine had the hardest time with it for the longest time. I cannot say that I was any good at meditation until I went to a Buddhist temple where they had guided meditation for alcoholics and non-alcoholics, and that's when it made sense to me. And until then, it had not been a practice that I felt like I was any good at or was getting much value out of. And I was so much in my head being bothered by the fact that I wasn't good at it that I couldn't get a lot from it. And I don't even want to tell you how many years I went struggling with that. I remember my sponsor answering me once, and I just pretended I didn't hear the question. And then the 12th step is happens when I'm sitting there and I hear there's somebody new, and I immediately think this is why I'm here. It's great that you're all here, but and I think sometimes maybe we can put too much emphasis on the newcomer, and we forget old timers who get drunk again right in the middle of AA. That does happen. So I've suffered more than once in my recovery, and I would have traded my sobriety with almost anybody that I knew in my whole group. They were all doing better than I was. It was just a tough time in life. So. But it's always good to remember that we're here to serve. We're here to serve people who are new. AA needs to be attractive to them, and they need to leave the room with hope that I need to leave the room with hope that I could be better despite what I thought I was capable of. And maybe one of the strongest messages of AA is that the first word in the first step is we. I could not get sober on my own. There's just no way. Fortunately for me, I didn't try. I just, right out of the gate, I believed you. And when I didn't, I tracked you down after the meeting. I got the book and said, show me where it says that. I don't believe you. So thank you for inviting me. And thank you for my sobriety and my life. To the degree that this is worthwhile, it's AA gets all the credit. And to the degree I messed it up, well, I'm still human. So thanks for listening. I appreciate you all. Thank you.